Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Major General Larry Stutzriem, U.S. Air Force retired and Director of Research here at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to our Spacepower Forum. We're very fortunate that General David D.T. Thompson could join us today. General Thompson is the Vice Chief of Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force, where he is responsible for assisting the Chief of Space Operations in organizing, training, and equipping space forces in the United States and overseas, integrating space policy and guidance, and coordinating space-related activities. He's a graduate of the Air Force Academy, an Olmsted Scholar, and a proud graduate of ICAF. He's a career space officer with assignments in operations, acquisition, research and development, and of course, command. Well, General, thanks for taking time and being with us today.
Good morning, General Stutzriem, and thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today.
Great, sir. Well, thanks again for being here. And what I think I want to do is give you a little bit of time to open up here. Tell us what it's taking to build out U.S. Space Force, maybe some of your challenges and priorities. And with that, over to you, General.
Okay, very good, thanks. And I do want to take just a few minutes, but what's really, I think, valuable and important in these sessions is the discussion that follows. So I'll just spend a few minutes talking about a few things briefly, but look forward to the follow-on engagement discussion and QA session. First, let me say, certainly the entire Department of the Air Force, not just U.S. Space Force, but the U.S. Air Force, the Space Force, and our entire department are very excited now that we have both a confirmed secretary and confirmed undersecretary, right? Secretary Kendall and Undersecretary Jones, both already, as you might imagine, hit the ground running, really getting started quickly and ready to move us into the next phase. I'd also like to, so we're excited they're here. We're excited that civilian leadership is in place and they're going to take us places we need to. I'd also like to just take a moment again and publicly thank Acting Secretary in the Interim, the Honorable John Roth, who he believes now has completed 47 years of service. He thought he had completed it earlier, but he's not just over that 47 years, certainly, but in this interim, as he's kept us moving forward and led us and prepared us for the incoming Secretary and Undersecretary. Thank him for his service as well. So just briefly, talk a little bit about where we are with the Space Force. I've been in many places and with the CSO and others talking about this before. Year one of the Space Force was very much focused on inventing the force, designing it, getting it in place. That was really about an 18-month activity. The design is complete, the resourcing is complete, certainly several more years of building it out fully, but that phase of establishing a Space Force is complete. And so year two really has been focused on integration of the force. Integration of the force with the services, integration with the force with the combatant commands, integration of the force with the rest of the, what I'll call the interagency, and with our partners and allies. And we've taken some pretty aggressive and significant steps thus far. The first is inter-service transfers. As many of you know, we began with a large transfer of individuals from the United States Air Force. Today, our numbers stand at about 5,800 in uniforms in the Space Force today, looking to bring in several dozen more in the first tranche from the Air Force, but also bringing them in from the Air Force Academy and basic military training. But we've also just identified our first tranche, the first 50 of inter-service transfers from the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy. They're kind of our beta test. They're trailblazing the path for large-scale inter-service transfer from those services into the Space Force. They've already begun that activity. And even as we do that, we are, as we speak, selecting up to about 350 others from that group who will follow behind them once they've trailblazed the path for that inter-service transfer. In addition to that, we're finalizing our transfer plans with the Army and the Navy for the transfer of missions and functions, some specific transfer of satellite communications missions and functions from the Army and the Navy, and we've begun early planning with the Army for some follow-on transfer of some missile warning functions. So that work is going very well, and we appreciate the collaboration and partnership of the Army, the Navy, and for some of the inter-service transfer of the Marine Corps. We just completed our first 4-star to 4-star warfighter talks between the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command. As you might imagine, there's been tremendous, and there's daily interaction and discussion and things that we're sorting out as we determine how the primary combatant command that receives our forces and we as the primary force provider for U.S. Space Command work that relationship. But another huge and important step, both U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command sent elements to PACOM's Pacific Century exercise with the specific purpose of understanding how the U.S. Space Force as a service and U.S. Space Command as a combatant command integrate and provide capabilities and contribute to combatant commander operations and objectives as part of Pacific Century. So that was tremendous in terms of what componency might look like, what U.S. Space Command's role related to combatant commands is, what U.S. Space Force's role related. That was, we sent both Space Force and Space Command sent 1-stars down there to lead teams, and I think it was incredibly productive, not just for our two organizations, but helping to inform the other combatant commands how we should proceed in the future. Deep already into mill-to-mill connections with a whole host of countries. General Raymond just got back from a multi-day trip to Europe where he met with a whole host of countries who, by creation of the Space Force, sort of their interest and need and understanding of what they need to do has been energized, and they've reached out to us to look at how we develop relationships, how we expand relationships, and how we better do in space what the nation and really our allies and partners have known how to do for decades in the air and on land and at sea. And it's not just our what I'll call our tried and true and well understood partners. We've had countries from South America and others in the Indo-Pacific who are interested in establishing some sort of a mill-to-mill relationship as it comes to security in space. So those are a lot of the activities related to integration, not fully. But as we do that, we continue also to address the challenges, which I would say the reasons for which a Space Force was created. We provided space capabilities to the Joint Force for decades. We did it under the Air Force very effectively. The game changer that really drove the creation of the Space Force was the threats that we face, the fact that we now have to defend and protect those capabilities we provide, and look at how we deny space capabilities to others. So those are the primary elements of the need for a Space Force. And to bring coherence and consistency and unity to those activities inside the Department of Defense. We just rolled out our 22 budget. We're still working with Congress on final implementation. And our priorities for that budget were really first to ensure that we can continue to provide the capabilities we already have, from GPS to missile warning to satellite communications to supporting the NRO and others with ISR from space. But now really focusing on defending and protecting those capabilities so that they can continue to provide what they need under attack. Pivoting toward designs and systems and architectures and forces that were really designed to operate under threat. The ones we have in space really weren't. So in addition to protecting what we have today, we're going to pivot toward architectures in the future that are designed to be resilient and robust and deliver capabilities under attack. Again, we've got to look at a whole host of ways to deny adverse use of space capabilities. If you think about it today and you really look at what's going on in the Indo-Pacific region, left to its own devices, our forces in that part of the world, maritime forces, air forces, land forces, and others, will be under constant surveillance and monitoring by Chinese overhead space constellation. That poses a great threat to our joint forces and to our potential operations, and we have to have means by which to address that. And then finally, a tremendous number of enablers for forces of a warfighting domain. Because this space had been a benign domain for so long, the need for a robust intelligence enterprise, especially an operational and tactical enterprise, like we see in the air, like we see in the maritime domain and land, did not exist. We've got to have that available. Our test and evaluation enterprise was really focused on ensuring that our satellites operated effectively, just simply operated every single day in the space domain. We now have to create a test and evaluation enterprise that tests and confirms that, in fact, these capabilities operate under attack, just like combat aircraft, just like combat action groups at sea, so on and so forth. We now have to build the enterprise that does that. We have to have more effective and detailed management of an entire suite of space professionals. And so all those enablers that need to support what is truly a military service and more importantly, military forces in the domain. So we keep, so we invested in those in 22 and we've made significant progress in 22. We're going to continue working those priorities as we work with first the Department of Defense and then obviously Congress on building the budget for 23. And then finally, before we move on to questions, many of you have probably seen recently the Secretary of Defense released our principles for and tenets of responsible behavior in space. You know, again, using the analogy of you know, military aircraft in international airspace and commercial and civil and military vessels on the high seas. We understand through decades and centuries of activity what responsible behavior looks like, what professional behavior looks like, what unsafe behavior looks like, what rules of engagement exist based on that behavior. Absolutely long since time to really develop that in space. And certainly inside the Department of Defense, the release of those tenets from the SecDef is an important step. And of course, we'll work with the rest of the US government, our partners and allies to engage more broadly as we really try to institute and incorporate those tenets of behavior as we go forward. Just a few of the things by way of opening comments that are keeping us busy, obviously many others. But let me stop there and really get to the meat of the session and look forward to the questions and comments and discussion that follows.
Very good. That was a great stage setter, General, and an update, actually. By the way, I see that in the markup. I know you can't get into these discussions, but the money came with all those people that are transferred, and that's good news. That's good news. And I will say also, we very much appreciate with the stand up of our Space Power Advantage Research Center. You know, it's really been a place where we're seeing the talent you have that's speaking up and moving out. And please pass that on. The team is great that we work with over there.
Thank you.
Well, let me explore a little bit in terms of the threat. You brought up the Indo-Pacific and this counterspace technology leads us to the clear conclusion that China and Russia see space as a critical warfighting domain, and they are developing ways of interrupting U.S. space operations, both in peace and in war, and all areas in between. What can you tell us a little more about how Space Force is preparing to defend against our space architecture against potential attacks?
Okay, sure. A couple of things. First and foremost, we do have to do as much as we can to protect and defend the capabilities that are on orbit today. While they were never really designed to operate in a warfighting domain, it doesn't mean that we're standing still, that we're not taking any actions. There's a whole host of things we can and we have done. The first is there are some adjustments we can make to the current systems, especially those systems that have been designed and are under construction and are being fielded to allow them to be able to contribute more to their defense. For example, in the past, the operation really has been typically there's fuel on board the spacecraft and it's used for two things. First of all, it's used for orbit raising and final placement of the spacecraft into orbit, and then it's used for attitude control and things like that throughout the life of the spacecraft. Well, if in fact in several cases we have redesigned the software, redesigned the flight control, redesigned the flight profiles, in fact upgraded our launch vehicles so that we deliver those satellites to orbit with a significant amount of more fuel available on board, so that we can introduce the concept of maneuver, just as you would do in any other domain, should we sense an impending attack. And so things like that, and ways to sense that you're under attack, and like I said, building responses and our guardian warfighters developing tactics, techniques, and procedures for when we transmit, when we don't, how we configure the satellite, how we make it a harder target based on what it looks like, what its mission is, the things that are available. So a whole host of things we're doing with today's system just to make them a little more defensive. And I'll tell you, there are other things that we're working and preparing that aren't specifically on board the spacecraft to help to contribute to that defense. And the other thing I'll tell you there is, it's not just a single domain activity. Just like we do with the rest of the joint force. There's a whole host of ways in which you protect your forces and your capabilities and your platforms. You may do it through cyberspace. You may do it through the air. You may do it in a whole host of ways. And so we're also looking at a multi-domain approach to include in space to help protect the capabilities that we have today. The second thing is, absolutely, as we think about those systems and architectures and forces that come, now is absolutely the time to start designing and fielding those architectures and those forces with the threat and the performance needed in mind. And generally speaking, and actually that was the creation of the Space Warfighting and Analysis Center. We previously, and we still have this organization called the Space Security and Defense Program. Many of the folks listening today know what that organization is, what it does, how it has really helped us, among other things, in how we protect and defend what we have today. But they are a tremendous analytical capability that we're now going to apply across the entire space enterprise to do a tremendous number of trades on performance and number of spacecraft in a constellation, and what orbit regimes they ought to work in, and what the cost is, and how these things respond and perform under attack. Many of the types of analyses that we've done with other forces and other force design activities in other domains over the years, we're finally now bringing effectively to space. In fact, they're almost complete with their first serious force design activity, which is missile warning, missile tracking, missile defense. And so those are the two big things we're doing to address the threat in terms of the adversary trying to take that capability away from us. Protect what we have and quickly pivot to architectures that naturally are more robust and resilient in the face of attack. And we're doing that not just so that in fact those capabilities are there should it come to conflict, but also hopefully to communicate very clearly and effectively to any potential adversary. If you try and attack, the deterrence message, which is,
yes,
try and attack us in space, you're not going to succeed.
Right.
So
that's a tremendous new course. And I'm just curious, even going back to the mid 2000s, we were talking about even then, the future of do we need a cyber command? And when you think about it, space and cyber are inextricably linked, and so I'm wondering, cyber defenses in the space realm, that's important to the overall health of the space enterprise, isn't it?
it is, absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the reasons, as you and others know, this force and this service is very narrowly focused. We're focused on operations in the space domain. We're focused on the intelligence that's required to operate effectively in the space domain. We're focused on acquisition and engineering and the development and fielding activities that we need to put these forces and these capabilities in the domain. And the last thing that is part of our mission set is cyber. And that's exactly why, because they're inextricably linked, because of that, among other things, that today RF and laser connection, if you cannot get the data and the capabilities provided from space to the ground, it doesn't matter to the soldier, the sailor, the airman, or the Marine on the ground, or our national leaders. And so it is inextricably linked on board the spacecraft. It's inextricably linked in our ground systems and our command control systems. It's inextricably linked in processing and exploitation and dissemination. And so we've created an 06 level command. In the Air Force, we call them groups or wings, in this case, primarily focused on mission groups, specifically focused on cyber. We are building that out so that we have indigenous U.S. Space Force cyber defense teams resident on every single one of our space mission systems. They lash up and will continue to lash up with U.S. Cyber Command. They're kind of the beat cops on our mission systems. As then we go to cyber command for the layered defense above that, we're putting these cyber professionals in more fully into our acquisition programs so that we ensure, no kidding, especially the ideas of cybersecurity and cyber defense are built in. So absolutely critical, and it has been and will continue to be one of the key components of the new service we're building.
Tremendous strategy. So you mentioned acquisition. Let me swing to that. Recently, the director of the Space Rapid Capabilities Office said it was, too early for consolidation. Given that consolidation of space acquisition organizations was one of the main reasons that Congress created the Space Force, what do you see as the vision for the end state of acquisition consolidation? Is it one organization? Is it two under Space Force? One doing procurement, sustainment.
Yeah. So I look at what we're doing in acquisition a little differently than let's say the term consolidation. Certainly, a couple of things. One is bringing focus and unity of effort and activity to that enterprise. But we are not at this point looking at what I'll call consolidation. And what I mean when I say consolidation is in creating Space Systems Command, we see a role and a responsibility for those constituent parts. Space Missile System Center, which has a tremendous and decades-long expertise in some of our very capable space systems. That will certainly evolve and has started that evolution in their organization with their first, what they called SMC 2.0, but they will continue to grow and evolve and focus in certain areas. Space RCO will continue to have its portfolio of what I'm going to call capabilities that we haven't pursued in the past. This idea of rapidly prototyping and experimenting and developing and then handing off for larger scale production, perhaps to what is today SMC. And then Space Development Agency. And on the 1st of October 2022, Space Development Agency will become part of the U.S. Space Force. Their leverage of commercial, their focus on those large scale, relatively on a unit by unit basis, lower cost satellites, and especially related to proliferation. So we see all of those organizations having, in most cases, very unique and capabilities and filling requirements, but there will be places where there will be some overlap in which we would like to see a little bit of competition. As you know, we like to see competition in industry because it makes these organizations more innovative, more aggressive, looking at new and better ways of doing things aggressively because they know, in this case, the company or who else next door is doing the same thing. There are certain places, it's not complete overlap, but there are certain places where we'll look for ideas and capabilities and concepts from the different organizations to see how they might play out and how we might put them through the warfighting analysis piece. And so clearly, there's roles for each one of those organizations that demand that they remain, in essence, what they are. There's places of overlap where they can compete and they can collaborate. But what we want to do, and it's not consolidation, what we want to do is bring enough unity across all of those activities so that we're sure they're not duplicating unnecessarily. They're not redundant, they're not duplicating, they're not working in conflict with each other. And across that entire acquisition enterprise, we have the right focus and the right priority on the right set of capabilities, rather than letting them proceed down individual stovepipe paths, which may not cover our highest priorities, which might be too redundant and too duplicative. And so absolutely right, we're not looking to consolidate, but we are looking to bring some unity and some integrated effort between them and other things as we move forward.
Very good. So it's been hot lately talking about overclassification of space, and we hear about it over here at Mitchell Institute frequently. We do understand the need for classification and security, but even General Hyten has spoke out on the overclassified nature of space operations budget and policy. what might be underway, or what are we thinking to do to tackle this issue? Is it a true problem?
It is absolutely a true problem for several reasons, and many people have, and lots of folks can discuss how we got to this place.
Yeah.
We're there, by a series of what were certainly perhaps logical decisions at the time, but what we really have to do, I'm going to call it rationalize. A similar approach to classification that we take. This is something we can learn from other domains. Is a better job of protecting what's no kidding vitally important in these capabilities and the way they operate, and obviously one of the reasons we classify is to protect potential vulnerabilities and limitations, but ensure that we're also not overclassifying to the point that, first of all, we can communicate effectively to friends, to allies, to the American public, to Congress, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the capabilities are. And then the second piece of that is to make it more effective in terms of integration. Integration not only with the rest of the joint force, but with our friends and allies. And the culture that we grew up in, where it was very much self-contained, very narrow. We had capabilities that nobody else did. There was no drive or requirement to integrate to a great extent because no one else had these capabilities and didn't know how to use these capabilities. But that culture has continued on for too long, and we really need to break it. We're working it in the Space Force. General Hyten's pushing it. I wish we owned our own destiny in that regard, but we don't. It's part of a broader activity, and we just have to work through that activity. What I will say is, I think we're on the verge of a couple of significant steps, and we've already taken a few, to really start breaking some of those shackles that we've put ourselves in, to first of all share more broadly where we are classified, but really be able to talk more publicly and openly about capabilities we need to for the purposes of integration, building the trust and confidence and understanding of the American people and our leaders, and communicating to friends, allies, and adversaries alike the capabilities we have and what they can anticipate. Great example. The B-21 is a tremendous capability. Is going to bring tremendous combat capability to the nation, to our friends and allies, and to the joint force. We know there's a B-21. We all know what it does, and generally, the things that are to its advantage. But very quickly, that you stop talking about some very specific aspects of it, and it serves the purpose both of friends, allies, the nation, understanding the combat capability that the Air Force is providing for the nation, at the same time protecting those things that will make it that effective combat arm for decades to come. We have to move more on that kind of approach to space, and that's what we're trying to do.
Oh, that's outstanding. Let me interject. It's an interesting issue from an entrepreneur's perspective. I discussed this with a business leader who wanted to bring their company's talents and intellectual property to bear to enter the defense market. And in order to even read and respond to some of the requests for proposal, he needed to already have a facility clearance and some tightly controlled SCI billets. And he was in a catch-22. He wants to get in, but he has to be in to get in. And so fortunately for him, he was large enough that he bought a company that had a classified contract. So do you see this, this is an impediment to really importing all the technology and innovation Space Force needs for the future, right?
It is absolutely, and you just described one of the very significant shortfalls and limitations of the approach of the past. And we're not all the way there yet, but we're also looking for other ways to enable that sort of relationship that doesn't require immediately, like as you said, you jump in and you're fully able to operate at, at the highest security levels. Lots of ways we're doing that. One is with the Space Enterprise Consortium, created by Space and Missile Systems Center and operated primarily out of Colorado Springs, but that is an innovation and entrepreneurial engine that, first of all, while all are welcome and it's open to all, really the design is, as you said, allow people to come with their innovation, their ideas, their technology, without having to do it in a classified sense, but really also tuned to small companies and entrepreneurs with ideas that are really intimidated, unfortunately, and frankly, we are intimidating when you think, oh, I'm going to go engage the gigantic Defense Department or U.S. government,
Right.
or U.S. Air Force, or
Yes.
U.S. Space Force. And so that Space Enterprise Consortium is especially tuned and designed to help make that connection, see what, with small dollars and small engagements, see the technology, see the concept, see the innovation that's out there. That's, I think, one of the key things that makes us different than the rest of the world, and make it easier to build that relationship, to let them develop their ideas and technology, and then see if there's a path forward to partnering.
Well, let's seg a little bit. We've got to talk about tactical ISR. It's, there's lawmakers who are expressing concerns over Space Force maybe, or assuming responsibility for providing tactical ISR from the NRO. Has there been progress in your discussions with the intel community on that?
So first, yeah, a couple things. First is the NRO has been for decades and continues today to be one of our closest partners. We provide about a third of their government workforce. We already have mechanisms in place today to integrate on architectures, to integrate on infrastructure where it makes sense. We're now working closely, and have been for several years, on, we have need to protect and defend the capabilities we have in orbit. They have that same need, so we've been working there. So they already are and have been a close partner. The other piece is they are now part of that integrated force design activity that the Space Warfighting Analysis Center has established and has run through there first. And so so that's the first thing, is we have a close partnership. We work very hard on ensuring that there's synergy and there's not duplication. The second thing is, let's just say, as you think about joint all-domain operations, joint all-domain command and control, the tremendous need for that network, sensor to shooter to decision maker, operating concept for the joint force that we're moving in the direction of. It is going to be and must be data rich. And if you're talking about anti-access area denial, a large portion of that data and that information has got to come from space. And so in some cases, whether you call it ISR or tactical ISR or indications and warning or battlefield awareness, there's plenty of room for the national security space enterprise to work those problems together. Let me give you an example. General Raymond just, I think a few weeks ago, talked about the fact that we are looking at the migration of the mission of ground moving target indication to space, right? JSTARS has done it, and done it for decades very well, but it can't do it in denied airspace. It can't do it over China and Russia every single day in peacetime. And so that mission moves to space. Is that it's certainly, I'll call it ISR, but is it tactical ISR? Is it battle space awareness? Is it domain awareness? And so we're looking at what it takes to move that mission to space. And we're looking closely with the intelligence community, and primarily the NRO, on what are the ways to do it? How do we do it collaboratively and together? Do we field a capability? Do we leverage their capability? We're looking at all of those options to be able to provide that data and that capability effectively. And I would say, in terms of the oversight required by Congress and others, bring it on. It's incumbent on us to show how we're working with the NRO and the intelligence community to provide that capability for the nation, and we'll sort out together how to do it effectively, not be duplicative, and not end up with stovepipe capabilities that don't mesh, that don't interoperate. So I guess that's a short way of saying, lots of ground to plow here, lots of collaboration needed and already in place, and we will figure out together the best way to provide all of this data and awareness for the nation.
Yeah, no, that's a tremendous explanation of how this needs to go. I would ask you, and I know you, of all the services, need to work very closely with the rest of the services. But how do you see the Army's initiative talking about building their constellation? Obviously, you said information needs to be sent, but they want to maintain operational. Is this Is this duplicative of what Space Force and Intel community provide now?
Yeah, so I'm going to be careful. I don't speak for the Army, and I won't
Yes.
speak for the Army, but have been engaged in many conversations with them. And what I would encourage people to do is, first of all, they have stated very clearly, as they should, when, as I talked about, joint all domain operations, joint all domain command and control, this future of connection and interoperability between sensors and shooters and forces, and how it all has, and decision makers, and how it has to fit together in real time, and making, near instantaneous decisions. The Army knows, like the rest of us, that it's got to create the forces and capabilities for the future that do that. And they know that information from space is part of that. And so, but what I'll say from there is I'm not sure, let's just say it's possible people are interpreting more from that perhaps than the Army's intending. Absolutely, they're looking at what data do we need from space, how do we get it, who do we partner with to get that data. And they're certainly, we're certainly one of their biggest customers. They're working with the intelligence community and NRO. And so I think people jump to the conclusion that the Army is going to build and fly satellites. And I'm not sure, if you talk to the Army more, you may discover that's not really what their vision is, but they absolutely know and are committed to ensuring that the data and the capability they need from space, that they're going to get from space. And there are many ways they're looking at to ensure that's the case.
So we love our U.S. Army too. Let's make that clear. Well, General, the Joint Staff was assigned, or the Joint Staff assigned to Space Force responsibility for identifying space-based capabilities that'll be needed to support JADC2. And you previously said that data relay, communications through space, is what will enable JADC2. So how, can you give us an image of how will this differ from how SATCOM has been done in the past?
Yeah. So I would characterize SATCOM as in the past as more narrowly focused and stovepipe than where we're going in the future, right? Even as we talk about protected communications, we talk about wideband communications, we talk about comm on the move. We bifurcate the requirements and the capabilities into those bins, and then we build or buy or some of both to provision them in a narrowly focused sense. And there will continue to be that sort of a need and role for satellite communications and space-based communications in the future, absolutely. But the real need and the growth and the capability that's going to move us into the future is going to be, no kidding, what I'm going to call that interconnected network that moves data, all over the enterprise, that moves it to decision makers, that moves it to intelligence centers, that moves it to operation centers, that simply, and I want to be careful because I could say the internet and space, but that's been used before. But this idea of this network that takes all types of data in all types of formats from all types of places and sensors and libraries and et cetera, and moves it where it needs to in real time without, do I have to establish a link or not? Do I have to get my terminal set up? Do I need some human in the loop to approve it and move it? And so that sort of a mesh network that connects all of that is really where we have to go on the ground, in the air, and in space to really realize the full vision of what we're going to need to do for joint all-domain command and control to provide that capability for the future. And so it's going to be, it needs to be much more interoperable and I'll call it path agnostic. The capability and the network needs to be there, and the network needs to have the ability to know that information needs to move from A to B, and it's going to make sure it gets there by any means necessary, not, oh, all I have is a wideband path, or all I have is protected communication, or all I have is some other form of space-based communications. And that's really the move, is no kidding, we have to look at it in a broad sense. And that may be, so that, and that's one of the big force design efforts that the Space Warfighting Analysis Center is going to be doing starting later this year, is that data relay and satellite communications element. personal opinion only, may be one of the most consequential activities that the U.S. Space Force will engage in for a long time.
Well, we're watching that. Very good. We also are watching some of the DARPA research with laser communications, which very exciting area of technology that helps enable what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Well, let me swing to commercial space services. You mentioned previously that Space Force is looking to expand acquisition of commercial space services beyond SATCOM to include ISR data and analysis. Can you give us an update on that progress, and how do you see this evolving?
Sure can. Some will remember that back in 2018, the Commercial Satellite Communications Office that was organized under Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA, was moved from DISA into Air Force Space Command at the time for I'll call it a one-stop shop, so to speak, for the provisioning of SATCOM for the Department and the Joint Force. As part of our design activity and determining what the Space Force should look like, that's one of the elements that we've moved into Space Systems Command. It remains and provides that activity. So again, sort of that same idea of it's not consolidation in the sense that it's absorbed somewhere because we didn't believe that was the correct answer. It maintains that capability, except in this case, the design team proposed and leadership approved an expansion of that office beyond commercial SATCOM to commercial space services in general. And so that office is in the process right now of expanding into those other commercial services. And as increasingly commercial services in other areas, remote sensing and space domain awareness and a whole host of other areas continue to be increasingly available, that arm, first of all, they are incorporated and will be incorporated as part of our, what I'll call our force design activity. And that office will be the arm by which we ensure it's provided effectively for any and all, but also efficiently, which means the ability to buy it once, the ability to buy it in bulk, and the advantages that come with being a large customer rather than onesie twosie in that sense. And so it's part of the overall design. It's been integrated as part of our space, what is about to be our Space Systems Command, and it is the office that's going to be responsible for ensuring we understand and we have the mechanisms by which to procure and provide those commercial services when, where, and how they're needed.
Thank you for that update. So if I could ask you one last question for this segment, and that would be for you to think out a few more years, but I mentioned DARPA, and DARPA is also moving out on nuclear propulsion and nuclear power. And we may see some space testing on propulsion in just a few years. How important, as you look out there, is nuclear propulsion and power going to be to the warfighting guardian of the future?
Yeah. So, nuclear power in general is always one of those interesting conversations that the nation has, and there's lots of perspectives and opinions. As no kidding look at operating long-term and sustainably in space, I think absolutely the nation has to look again at what its perspective is and what its use is. We know, for example, NASA's looking at that as it returns to the moon and looks out further. I think two things. First of all, nuclear propulsion itself, excuse me, holds, I would say, the potential for a significant advantage. If you look at it in terms of efficiency, it's about twice as efficient as I'll call our standard chemical rockets today. And so with a doubling in efficiency, in essence, in some ways, a doubling in performance, it expands the envelope in terms of how far you can go, how much you can use it, so on and so forth. So that is that would be an evolutionary step in that regard. What I would contend is I'm just as interested in the nuclear power aspects of the potential for nuclear use in space. Just imagine and certainly as we, and has always been the case with NASA, the further away you get from the sun, the harder it is for solar panels to do what you need them to. But solar panels are also very large, they're also very flimsy, and they also limit your ability to do things like maneuver quickly and under high G should you need to do that. And so, like I said, there are certainly large-scale policy considerations and that discussion that has to occur, but absolutely, I think the nation and the Space Force as part of it has to look hard at the advantages and opportunities that nuclear power and nuclear propulsion provide, and decide very deliberately how we want to proceed that way.
Yeah, and it appears that we're at the front end of a new public discussion about nuclear power, both on land and in space uses, and it's probably not too early to start educating and informing about the safety and need for these two uses of nuclear.
Yes, sir. And as you know, it's our job to provide our insight and perspective and advice to our civilian leadership, and they'll tell us what we can and can't do, and we will proceed along those as they direct.
Well said. Well, we've come to the end of this segment of our discussion. General Thompson, DT Thompson, thanks again for your insights, your openness, sharing your perspectives on the future of the Space Force, and especially past thanks to your support team. They're world class.
Thanks. Always glad to hear that, and it's been a real privilege joining you here today.
As an alert to our listeners, our next Spacepower Forum is on August 3rd, when we will be hosting Senator Mike Rounds. We certainly hope you'll join us for that. Okay, we're now going to open the session to audience questions who've been listening to our conversation, General. And as a reminder to our listeners, you can participate by using the Q&A function, the raise hand function on your device. When I call on you, please unmute, state your name and where you're from, and then ask your question. And we've got lots of questions in writing, and I'll be going through those as we go ahead. So first I call on Teresa Hitchens, and Teresa's from Breaking Defense.
Hi, sir. It's nice to see you. Thanks for doing this today. My question goes back to responsibilities for the gathering of ISR data, tactical ISR data. And I want to know if you can explain more clearly who's in charge of making the decisions for the responsibility, who gets what responsibility to do what. And this is both for building satellites to do this and for acquiring tactical ISR, because the NRO also is responsible for acquiring tactical ISR, if you will, imagery data, GEOINT data, which is a piece of tactical ISR. The Army's looking at doing some of that, but primarily my question is between NRO and the Space Force. I understand that on the commercial end that there is a new council, a commercial council at the IC that's going to be discussing some of these issues, but could you just help me understand how these decisions are made? Because it seems to me that there are pretty intense discussions going on that have to be resolved at some point for people to know what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to put their budget money.
Sure, Teresa, good to hear from you again, and thanks for the question. What I'll say in general and in principle, the responsibility and the decision is that of the intelligence community, and I know that's sort of a general answer, but as we talk about it and you think about what the intelligence community is, clearly you've got the Director of National Intelligence that is responsible for oversight and leadership of that entire community. But it has several key elements, including the NRO, obviously. It has 18 members, and those members include the intelligence apparatus of the services, including the Space Force. The Space Force was added as the 18th member back in January, and it has a strong and fundamental element, intelligence undersecretary on the OSD staff, working directly for the Secretary of Defense. And so the apparatus and the processes and the activities are in place to already ensure across the intelligence community and I'll say with the intelligence community and other elements of the DoD to include the services, both the providers and users, all of those mechanisms are in place to ensure that those issues and those opportunities and those concerns and the need to integrate but not duplicate are raised, and decisions made on who provides, how they provide, and how they're interrelated. And so I would say those mechanisms are all already in place and already being exercised to ensure that's the case. And we just need to ensure that we use them effectively to both make sure the right decisions are made and collectively the right capabilities and information and intelligence is provided to both national leadership and the joint forces and others.
Do you expect these some of these decisions to be represented in the 2023 budget?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll stop there
Thank
for
you.
now because
Yes,
we're
of
very early
course.
in the budget process. Way
Yes.
too early to be talking much more about the 23 budget.
We're here to protect you there, General. Courtney Albin from Inside Defense.
Yes, good morning. My question is about the Space Warfighting Analysis Center. Some lawmakers have raised concern about possible duplication between the missions of the SWAC and the Space Security and Defense Program. I wondered if you could speak about how the Space Force views the distinction between those two organizations, and from your point of view, what might be the pros and cons of consolidating them?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, in fact, what we've done, and some of this is very much, evidence that we have to continue to communicate and inform and discuss, so that to ensure that the vision and the understanding and the specifics of what we're intending to do is available to all. And so really what we have done with the Space Warfighting Analysis Center is Space Security and Defense Program, SSDP, has a charter that's very specifically focused on an element of the space enterprise and a mission set of the space enterprise. And that's primarily, as it says, security and defense, what we need to do to protect and defend capabilities that we have in space. It is not chartered, and by the way, that organization is chartered by the Deputy Secretary of Defense and Principal Deputy Director of the DNI. It's not chartered to say, what should we do for an enterprise for missile warning, missile tracking, missile defense. It's not chartered for what should our future positioning, navigation, and timing enterprise look like. It's not chartered to do what should our space data relay and tracking enterprise look like. So in fact, what we've done, and I think here's where we have to work harder at communicating more effectively, is we've taken that model and simply replicated it across those other mission areas. And so it's not duplication, it's taking that tremendous organization, all that it's done for us, and said, we just need to resource it and build these activities to be able to do it in all those other areas. And in fact, that's what we've done. Now, SSDP remains because it's still a joint organization between the intelligence community and the Department of Defense, one of those other mechanisms by which we integrate, and said that remains in place. And we, in essence, these other capabilities and analysis capabilities and design activities now occur in parallel in the other mission areas. And that's what we've done to build the Space Warfighting Analysis Center. So what we've really done is said, absolutely, we agree. SSDP is effective. It has worked effectively. It's done great things for the nation, for the national security space enterprise. Why wouldn't we, we looked at a whole host of ways of doing this. Why wouldn't we expand that repertoire and that set of capabilities across the entire set of missions we're responsible for? And that's what the Space Warfighting Analysis has said. And oh, by the way, the Space Warfighting Analysis isn't doing on its own security and defense. It's counting on SSDP to be connected with the rest of the elements of the SWAC to do that for the national security space enterprise. And so that's what the SWAC is, why we think it's vital, also why it's important to bring that unity that our national leaders have been talking about for years and really turn this into the rigorous analytical development of capabilities that has been lacking for the past decades with respect to the Arctic.
Very good. Frank Wolf from Defense Daily.
Yeah, good morning, General. Just wondered if you could discuss a little bit the replacement of SPADOC with Project Atlas, how that's coming along, and also just in terms of the Unified Data Library, I guess the contract had been awarded to BlueStack for that to develop the UDL. If on those elements, and if you would just if there's a timeline for space-based radar, again, you talked about that already with the tactical ISR, but if there's any kind of notional timeline that's out there yet in your discussion with NRO, others, if there's any ideas on that space-based GMTI timeline on that.
Sure, thank you very much. First, I got an update. I was about 2.5 weeks ago on all things space domain awareness to include SPADOC and Atlas. In fact, you know, it's long since overdue to replace that 1980s era technology, and Atlas, and unfortunately now you're stretching my memory, which increasingly failing me every day. But I absolutely, Atlas is on track near term, and if not later this year, whatever the schedule is, I think it's either later this year or early next year when it's supposed to deliver and really allow us to get off that old platform. It is moving along quickly and aggressively, and right now absolutely meeting all the gates to do that. So feeling very, very confident that it's going to come in and ensure that we don't have the risk associated with that old and slow and fragile and frankly obsolete platform that has been serving us well for years, but we have long since need to replace. That's one element. It's also part of a broader activity to do a couple of more things. As you described, the Unified Data Library, it is one of the large and key contributions that the Space Force is providing, both to the joint JADC2 activity between the Air Force and Space Force, which is Advanced Battle Management System, but also we believe in working with the joint community, a key element of JADC2 writ large. As you said, we've put that in place, and really a couple of things are happening. The first is we put the unclassified piece in place first. We built out secret level. We're building out higher level classification levels. So this is, no kidding, unified in the sense that it encompasses all classifications. But where we're using it and where it's incredibly valuable for us today is in a couple of areas. One is, no kidding, we've used it in several of the ABMS demonstrations that show how you would use such a data library and repository for a whole host of reasons. Understanding issues with access, understanding issues with latency, understanding issues with the architecture. So we're also learning a lot in that regard to be able to make the smart decisions that are coming to evolve it and ensure that it provides what it needs to in terms of JADC2. So that's the second piece. And circling that back to Atlas, it is our repository for space domain awareness data so that we can move beyond Atlas, really bring in and fully utilize all sorts of data beyond what I would call standard traditional space domain awareness data. Data of all sorts and all qualities to be able to use state-of-the-art processing and exploitation techniques to fuse and use all of that data. So it's also serving that foundation to evolve the space domain awareness enterprise. And then, so that's where we are. And then finally, in terms of space-based radar, ground moving target indication, unfortunately, I really can't give you a whole lot of additional detail right now for several reasons, other than to say it is an active program that we are both engaged in the force design related activity as to see what it should look like and what the interrelationship is between what we should do and what the NRO and what the IC should do, and really to make sure we're doing the appropriate technology and other development activities that would lead to production and fielding of a capability sometime in the future, relatively near future.
Thanks.
Hey, General, if I could just, one last question. We're going to extend a couple minutes here. I think this will be fairly brief. You referred to it earlier in your opening comments. This comes from Air Force Magazine. I'll read it. Can you talk about how European partners and their capabilities make U.S. Space Force stronger. You mentioned that. Some of these partners in the past were only willing to cooperate on the civilian side of space, but not on the military side. Has that changed?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, that has changed dramatically in the last several years, in large part due to the activities of potential adversaries and the understanding from those other nations what the implications are of the inability to operate in space and what an adversary could do if they take those capabilities away. And so that has certainly helped, but also the strong partnership that we've had with both traditional and I'll call other allies that not traditional from a space perspective that we're increasingly working more closely with, participation in war games and exercises, and especially I'll highlight the Stutzriem war game series that we've done now for more than 2 decades, but in the last decade certainly focused much more on, with our partners, not just at the operational level, but sometimes at the ministerial and policy level, has really brought them on board and understanding the threats and challenges and needs we all face collectively in space. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, and I'll go a little bit back to the culture we grew up in when we were talking about classification earlier. In the past, we owned it all, we did it all. We had this culture that basically says, we're our own independent, self-contained enclave, and whatever we need, we build, we field, we operate, and we use. Can't afford to do that anymore. Absolutely should not expect that we should afford to do that. And so that those engagement and that cooperation really increasingly now is, and these countries have been asking for several years, and we've been effective to some extent, ineffective in total. They've been coming many years and saying, look, we understand the importance of space. We have a limited budget. We need to invest in ways that matter to us and matter to our allies and partners, starting with the United States. Help us understand where you want us to invest, or your thoughts, or give us your thoughts and inputs on where we should invest. Now, as sovereign nations, they'll decide whether they want to, but they've been much more excited about where can we help and what should we be doing. And so that's increasing now with the Space Force, and the immediate areas that we can and should be doing this in are the areas of communications and data relay, space domain awareness, a whole host of other things that we can share and partner with that they're ready to move out with immediately. We're already working. We've been doing it for years with the Brits and the Canadians and the Australians and the New Zealanders. We're increasingly doing it with Germany and Japan and France, and even looking to other, surprisingly perhaps to some, Norway is a pretty reasonable space power for a very small nation, but they bring important capabilities and they're ready to move forward and partner, and they have been. And so those sorts of things and engagements are really helping us to move out and really making us better collectively, but also ensuring that we, the United States and the U.S. Space Force and others, don't and shouldn't believe that we're the ones who have to pay for and provide all the capabilities.
Well, very good, General. It's been a delight to talk to a space warfighter of your caliber this morning, and we've come to the end of this Spacepower Forum event. Big thanks to you again, General D.T. Thompson.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. To you and our audience, from all of us here at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, have a great Aerospace Power Day.